Listen to a conversation between a student and her photography professor.
Professor Johnson, there's something that's been on my mind.
Okay.
Remember last week you told us that it's really important to get our photography into a show, basically as soon as we can?
Yep, it's a big step, no question.
Thing is, I'm sitting here and I'm just not sure how I'd get there. I mean, I've got some work I like, but is it really what a gallery is looking for? How would I know? How do I make the right contacts to get into a show? I just really don't...
Okay, hold on, slow down. These are questions that, well, just about every young artist has to struggle with. Okay, the first thing you should do is you absolutely have to stay true to your artistic vision. Take the pictures you want to take. Don't start trying to catch the flavor of the month and be trendy because you think you'll get into a show. That never works because you wind up creating something you don't really believe in. It's uninspired and won't make any shows. I've seen it happen so many times. This doesn't mean that you should go into a cave. Keep up with trends. Even think about how your work might fit in with them, but don't mindlessly follow them.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I think, though, that I've always been able to stay pretty true to what I want to create, not what others want me to create. I think that comes through in my work.
Okay. Just remember that it's one thing to create work that you really want to create when it's in the classroom. The only thing at stake is your grade. But work created outside the classroom, that can be a different story. Now, I'm not talking about technique or things like that. It's just that there's so much more at stake when you're out there making art for a living. There's a lot of pressure to become something you're not, and people often surrender to that pressure.
But to get stuff exhibited...
Well, you need to be a bit of an opportunist. Common sense things like always having a sample of your work on hand to give to people. You won't believe the kind of contacts and opportunities you can get this way. And try to get your work seen in places like restaurants, bookstores. You'd be surprised how word gets around about photography in places like that.
Okay. It's just so hard to think about all of those practical things and make good work, you know?
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I think, though, that I've always been able to stay pretty true to what I want to create, not what others want me to create. I think that comes through in my work.
Why does the student say this?
I think that comes through in my work.
Listen to part of a lecture in a marine biology class.
We know whales are mammals and that they evolved from land creatures. So the mystery is figuring out how they became ocean dwellers. Because until recently, there was no fossil record of what we call the missing link. That is, evidence of species that show the transition between land-dwelling mammals and today's whales. Fortunately, some recent fossil discoveries have made the picture a little bit clearer. For example, a few years back in Pakistan, they found the skull of a wolf-like creature. It was about 50 million years old. Scientists had seen this wolf-like creature before, but this skull was different. The ear area of the skull had characteristics seen only in aquatic mammals, specifically whales. Then also in Pakistan, they found the fossil of another creature, which we call Ambulocetus natans. That's a mouthful, eh? The name Ambulocetus natans comes from Latin, of course, and means walking whale that swims. It clearly had 4 limbs that could have been used for walking. It also had a long, thin tail, typical of mammals, something we don't see in today's whales. But it also had a long skeletal structure, and that long skeletal structure suggests that it was aquatic. And very recently, in Egypt, they found a skeleton of Basilosaurus. Basilosaurus was a creature that we had already known about for over 100 years, and it has been linked to modern whales because of its long whale-like body. But this new fossil find showed a full set of leg bones, something we didn't have before. The legs were too small to be useful. They weren't even connected to its pelvis and couldn't have supported its weight. But it clearly shows Basilosaurus's evolution from land creatures. So that's a giant step in the right direction. Even better, it establishes Ambulocetus as a clear link between the wolf-like creature and Basilosaurus. Now, these discoveries don't completely solve the mystery. I mean, Ambulocetus is a mammal that shows a sort of bridge between walking on land and swimming, but it also is very different from the whales we know today. So, really, we are working with just a few pieces of a big puzzle. A related debate involves some recent DNA studies. Remember, DNA is the genetic code for any organism, and when the DNA from two different species is similar, it suggests that those two species are related. And when we compared some whale DNA with DNA from some other species, we got quite a surprise. The DNA suggests that whales are descendants of the hippopotamus. Yes, the hippopotamus. Well, that came as a bit of a shock. I mean that a four-legged land and river dweller could be the evolutionary source of a completely aquatic creature up to 25 times its size? Unfortunately, this revelation about the hippopotamus apparently contradicts the fossil record, which suggests that the hippopotamus is only a very distant relative of the whale, not an ancestor. And of course, as I mentioned, that whales are descended not from hippos, but from that distant wolf-like creature. So we have contradictory evidence. And more research might just raise more questions and create more controversies. At any rate, we have a choice. We can believe the molecular data, the DNA, or we can believe the skeleton trail. But unfortunately, probably not both. And there have been some other interesting findings from DNA research. For a long time, we assumed that all whales that had teeth, including sperm whales and killer whales, were closely related to one another. And the same for the toothless whales, like the blue whale and other baleen whales. We assumed that they'd be closely related. But recent DNA studies suggest that that's not the case at all. The sperm whale is actually closely related to the baleen whale, and it's only distantly related to the toothed whales. So that was a real surprise to all of us.
Listen to part of a lecture in a European history class.
So would it surprise you to learn that many of the foods that we today consider traditional European dishes, that their key ingredients were not even known in Europe until quite recently? Until the Europeans started trading with the native peoples of North and South America? I mean, you're probably aware that the Americas provided Europe and Asia with foods like squash, beans, turkey, peanuts. But what about all those Italian tomato sauces, Hungarian goulash, or my favorite, French fries, those yummy fried potatoes?
Wait, I knew potatoes were from where, South America?
South America, right, the Andes Mountains.
But you're saying tomatoes too? I just assumed since they're used in so many Italian dishes.
No, like potatoes, tomatoes grew wild in the Andes, although unlike potatoes, they weren't originally cultivated there. That seems to have occurred first in Central America. And even then, the tomato doesn't appear to have been very important as a food plant until the Europeans came on the scene. They took it back to Europe with them around 1550, and Italy was indeed the first place where it was widely grown as a food crop. So, in a sense, it really is more Italian than American. And another thing, and this is true of both the potato and the tomato, both of these plants are members of the nightshade family. The nightshade family is a category of plants which also includes many that you wouldn't want to eat, like mandrake, belladonna, and even tobacco. So it's no wonder that people once considered tomatoes and potatoes to be inedible too, even poisonous. And in fact, the leaves of the potato plant are quite toxic. So it took both plants quite a while to catch on in Europe, and even longer before they made the return trip to North America and became popular food items here.
Yeah, I remember my grandmother telling me that when her mother was a little girl, a lot of people still thought that tomatoes were poisonous.
Oh, sure. People didn't really start eating them here until the mid-1800s.
But, seems like I heard, didn't Thomas Jefferson grow them or something?
Ah, well, that's true. But then Jefferson is known not only as the third president of the United States, but also as a scholar who was way ahead of his time in many ways. He didn't let the conventional thinking of his day restrain his ideas. Now, potatoes went through a similar sort of a rejection process, especially when they were first introduced in Europe. You know how potatoes can turn green if they're left in the light too long? And that greenish skin can make the potato taste bitter, even make you ill. So that was enough to put people off for over 200 years. Yes, Bill?
I'm sorry, Professor Jones, but yeah, okay, American crops have probably contributed a lot to European cooking over the years, but...
But have they really played any kind of important role in European history? Well, as a matter of fact, yes. I was just coming to that. Let's start with North American corn, or maize, as it's often called. Now, before the Europeans made contact with the Americas, they subsisted mainly on grains that often suffered from crop failures. And it's largely for this reason that political power in Europe was centered for centuries in the south, around the Mediterranean Sea, which was where they could grow these grains with more reliability. But when corn came to Europe from Mexico, well, now they had a much hardier crop that could be grown easily in more northerly climates, and the centers of power began to shift accordingly. And then, well, as I said, potatoes weren't really popular at first, but when they finally did catch on, which they did first in Ireland around 1780, well, why do you suppose it happened? Because potatoes had the ability to provide an abundant and extremely nutritious food crop. No other crop grown in Northern Europe at the time had anything like the number of vitamins contained in potatoes. Plus, potatoes grown on a single acre of land could feed many more people than, say, wheat grown on that same land. Potatoes soon spread to France and other Northern European countries, and as a result, the nutrition of the general population improved tremendously, and populations soared in the early 1800s. And so the shift of power from southern to northern Europe continued.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
I'm sorry, Professor Jones, but yeah, okay, American crops have probably contributed a lot to European cooking over the years, but...
But have they really played any kind of important role in European history? Well, as a matter of fact, yes. I was just coming to that.
What can be inferred about the professor when she says this?
But have they really played any kind of important role in European history?